Okay, welcome everyone to session 2 of Pollinators and Plains Conference. Thank you all again for attending. I'm going to mute everybody.
Yeah, I'm having trouble getting the audio on this laptop.
Okay, and I muted everybody. I'm going to ask you, Kirsten, to unmute yourself. If we can hold all the questions until the end, there'll be a time for live questions. And if you think of something during the presentation, you could type it into the chat box. Again, the chat is at the bottom of the Zoom window or behind the 3 dots, ellipses, if you're on mobile, and you can chat a comment and we'll moderate some of that and get it to Kirsten. So take it away.
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen for a presentation, and then after my presentation, there's going to be kind of like a demonstration that I have set up just to my left. So we'll go ahead and get started. This session is called Alternative Beehives and Our Ongoing Research. My name is Kirsten Bailey, and I've been a beekeeper for 4 years. I have 5 hives right now in 2 different locations. I sell my honey directly to customers, and we also make some value-added products with the honey. We haven't dabbled into using the wax or other products from the hive yet. We're just really focused on honey production and using the honey in like vinegars and hot sauces and other things that my family is interested in. I work for the Center for Rural Affairs, and at the Center for Rural Affairs, I teach Explore beekeeping classes, and I offer technical assistance to beekeepers as well. My favorite pollinator is a bumblebee. Honeybees are great, but there's just something about bumblebees. It's so cute. And on our family farm, we try to plant cover crops that are going to have both value to the honeybees on the farm, but also other pollinators. And through these cover crops and those floral resources that we're planting, I'm trying to get better at taking photos of honeybees and bumblebees. So that is my goal this year, is to get as many pictures as possible. Okay, so like I said, I work at the Center for Rural Affairs, and I have for 5 years. The Center for Rural Affairs was established in 1973. My office is in Brainerd, Nebraska. Our home office is in Lyons, Nebraska. We are working to create more vibrant rural communities. We do that through assisting rural business owners with their business needs. We have some policy work both on the state and national level. And then we help beginning farmers with land access, accessing USDA programs, and any other things that might come up. We're also working on building more welcoming and equal opportunity in communities within the center. Our research project was developed because we saw a need within the beekeeping community and within the beginning beekeepers we were meeting, that they had a lot of questions about these alternative hives. The issue of lifting so many pounds, lifting the deeps and the honey supers came up. So we wanted to make sure that we could come up with a project that researched these less heavy options to make beekeeping more accessible to everyone. So at the same time, we had all these questions come up from these new beekeepers and some existing beekeepers as well. The honey industry continued to experience kind of a drop in the number of beehives in production, and that was because of all the pressures that bees have with their health, and then also some beekeepers just going into retirement. And the good news is, though, that beekeeping as a supplemental farm income is increasing in popularity, especially among vegetable growers. That's how we first got into it on our farm. Was we had a large vegetable plot. A beekeeper offered to keep bees here, and our yields on our vegetables just went up dramatically, like 2 to 3 times. We could not believe it. And the quality of produce was better, and it just like made a huge difference on our vegetable side of our enterprise. So I can see why more of those like diversified vegetable farmers are looking at beekeeping as a nice like sideline. So among these new beekeepers that are entering this industry, we have women, senior farmers, and some with disabilities. And these people specifically are going to struggle with the Langstroth Hive, which is the hive that we're using as our control because it's large and heavy. I'm going to go into a little bit of the history of the Langstroth Hive, and then I'll talk more about our project. The Langstroth Hive was developed in the mid-1800s by Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth, and he was a native of Philadelphia. Here's just a rough drawing of what they look like. But he developed the vertical boxes that are stacked up on top of each other, which you can see here. And he really made sure that you could open the top of the stack, but also that there was bee space all around the frame. So if you're looking down at this deep from the top, you can see this white area represents the gaps. That's about 6 to 8 millimeters, 9 millimeters wide. And that gap is all around the frames as well. So on the sides, on the bottom, and it's so that the bees can crawl through and around. So that is kind of what this picture is about. So again, this is 2 deeps. They have 10 frames each. This is where the bees enter in. These are bees. Real rough sketch here. So the modern day Langstroth hives are very heavy. The deep box, again, which is where the brood and the queen live, it's the 10 frames, it's these 2 bottom boxes here, can be around 80 pounds each. And there's traditionally 2 of those in Nebraska per hive, and that's kind of what we need here to overwinter. And then on top of that, you put on your honey supers. I run mediums on mine, and that's what you're seeing in these pictures. And each one of these can be around 40 pounds. So what you're seeing here, this fully stacked one that's not being opened, that's around 280 pounds to lift. And so if you need to check if there's a problem, and so you need to get the bottom, you have to lift all of this stuff off first. This is my dad. He helps me with most of my beekeeping when I can get him. He's also a farmer, both on our farm and on another farm. And so he helps me with all my heavy lifting. If I can't get him to help me, then I try to beg, borrow, and steal friends because I can't lift some of these boxes by myself. Here he's just putting on an empty super. We're just getting ready to give them more space so we can get more honey. So when we were designing our research project, we knew that we wanted the beekeepers themselves to test the hives, and we knew based on questions and the history that we had with beekeepers, which hives we wanted to research more about. We decided that we were going to have 4 test sites, and at each site they were going to have a control, and they were going to have 2 of the alternative hives. Again, because of our experience, we knew we needed to have 2 of each of those. So at each site, there's 6 hives that are in our research program. The beekeepers had to have at least 3 years of experience, and they had to agree to keep, again, the 2 Langstroth hives as controls, and they had to take data, and they had to host a field day each year. In exchange for these services, we provided 2 of the test hives each of the test hives, so it would be 4 hives total, and replacement bees for those hives each year if needed. So the project is to check out these hive designs that are a little bit lighter, and we want to have top bar hives, which are a horizontal system, and then the long Langstroth hive, which is also horizontal, but it uses the same frames as the traditional Langstroth hives. Instead of lifting boxes off and looking at them, you kind of go through it like a filing cabinet. So it's all laid out horizontally. We also wanted to look at keeping bees in supers. We use shallows instead of mediums, and nuke boxes. Both of those are about half the weight as a deep. We're going to be tracking production and hive behavior throughout the season, throughout the whole year, and we plan to share the results with beekeeping associations, the newly established Great Plains Master Beekeeping Program through the University of Nebraska Lincoln, UNL, and through our own media team. The UNL Bee Lab is advising on this project, so they're going to be visiting the test apiaries twice a year for technical assistance, and they're also on call. Our funding was made possible by the USDA and Nebraska Department of Agriculture through their specialty crop block grant. Honey is a specialty crop. So now I'm going to talk about each hive and kind of what we learned in our first year, and then again I'll do a little bit of a show and tell later. This is just a test site that one of the beekeepers has. So again, this is the traditional Langstroth Hive. Again, not much has changed in 100 years. Each one of these boxes is called a deep, and there's 10 frames in here, and it keeps the queen and the brood, and the frames are a standard size. These are the things to keep in mind as we move through the different hives that we're looking at. The first one we're going to talk about is the shallows. So these are a type of honey super. They're about half as tall as a deep box. So again, referring to the previous picture, 2 of these are about the same size as 1 deep. Traditionally, these are going on top of the deeps for honey production, but we're using them in place of the deeps. And then this is just a couple of pictures from our test sites, but each one of these supers can weigh between 30 to 40 pounds. The weight varies between honey storage and brood production. So the brood is lighter than the honey. Going into winter, we had some concerns. There's gaps, again, because of that bee space in between each one of these boxes, and we were worried that the bees wouldn't cross up and move up to get to the honey stores because those gaps are a little bit colder and they aren't filled with food, so they're less likely to move up as they need the food. We're kind of seeing that play out now. We have 2 confirmed losses, and one of them, they said that they found, they found the dead nest just in this middle one, so they hadn't moved up. So that's what we're seeing. However, the beekeepers who have these on site really still like them. They integrate well with her system, specifically because she uses shallows as honey supers. So she already has the frames, and she already has the bottom boards and all the lids, so it just integrates well. So we're excited to see kind of how it turns out there. She also likes that they're half as heavy, so that just allows her personally to have more independence in checking her bees, and she doesn't have to rely on help all the time. So again, here's a couple of pictures from in action. This one is 5 high, just in case it's not showing up very well, and then this one's 3. The next system that I'm going to talk about is beekeeping in Nukes. The Nukes we used are wooden. They're half as wide as a traditional deep. They only hold 5 of those frames instead of 10. They do use the traditional Langstroth frames, and traditionally, Nukes are sold at the beginning of the spring for beekeepers to get a jump start on the hive instead of just buying a package of bees that doesn't have any comb. This one has comb, this one has brood. They're like kind of ready to go. These can weigh between 20 and 40 pounds, depending on, again, if they are housing brood or honey. We did notice throughout the summer that there was more bearding on our Nukes. So that would mean the bees were hanging out outside on the front here instead of like working in the hive. And you'll get that on traditional Langstroths as well. It's hot and humid in Nebraska, so there's just days when they're just like on the front porch hanging out. But we just noticed that they were on the front porch hanging out more often with these systems. These were the most dramatic of all the hives that we had. Nebraska, much like Kansas, is known for its wind. So on a particularly windy storm, the whole stack blew over. So it was 6 high, and the bees were fine. They were all mostly in these bottom 3. They were in the brood nest, so they clustered together. But the storm happened on a Saturday, and this particular beekeeper found this on a Monday. So we're very happy that they didn't abscond and that they did stick around and keep each other warm. Again, it was August, so we weren't too worried about it. After this incident here, they were tarp strapped down. Again, they were able to survive because it was so warm and it wasn't cold. So we quickly adjusted. We recommended the 2 apiaries who had these tarp strap them down to keep them from blowing over. At the other apiary, so not this one where the first incident happened, our first snowstorm had a lot of wind in it and it blew over, and they were not tarp strapped down. She forgot to put them back on. once she winterized, because she took them off to do that, and she wasn't particularly that worried about it because they were just 4, maybe 5 high. They survived that as well because they were clustered together, and she found it right away. So the 3, it was again the 3 stayed together, and then like the top fell off. So they are now tarp strapped down as well. At the height of the summer, the tallest one we had was 8 of these stacked high. So that's kind of a problem because they're, having to like get on ladders now to lift stuff off. So it was good to see what they could do and how they could produce and get so high, but we weren't anticipating them filling that many of these boxes. So again, you can see here, this apiary site is winter ready, and so they're tarp strapped down, ready to go. I'm going to talk about the long Langstroth hive now. This is a horizontal system. And so we got plans from UNL. They're still being improved on, but this was like the first version of those plans that we were using. So it uses Langstroth frames again, but it's oriented horizontally. And then for the lids, this drawing doesn't show that, but there's actually 3 lids. We use migratory lids on top of here. So the things that our beekeepers were really looking forward to checking out was the fact that you weren't going to have to lift boxes off of the hive to inspect the brood area. And that is something they actually both mentioned in our end of year webinar that they both liked. They loved that aspect of it. They could just like kind of get in there, look at a few things and get out. They didn't have to take the whole hive apart. The way they were designed, the long laying and the top bars are high enough that you don't have to bend over. So they weren't having to bend down, lift stuff up, twist, or anything like that. So both of them were really interested in like saving their back. We did notice that the long layings took longer to fill out than other hives in the study. Here's a picture of one in the apiary. They can hold anywhere between 20 to 30 frames depending on how long they are. This particular box I think holds 32. So again, you can see like those migratory lids there. There's 3 like distinct breaks here. And this is how ours are oriented. There's other ones that are oriented with like the entrance on the side. And I'll kind of get into that versus this here in a minute. So some of our beekeepers in our projects added supers on top in the middle. So they took off a migratory lid and he put on supers. He wanted to try that. We were game to see how that worked because we want to make it very practical and we wanted to have it tested in ways that beekeepers are apt to use them. So this person in particular, they had filled out the frame, so rather than harvest from the back, he wanted to build up. And he was able to harvest from those hives in that way. The issues that we had, and this picture kind of highlights some of those, is that we had queen issues, we had ant issues, we had moisture issues with this design. So it seemed to be if there was a problem with a hive, it usually was with one of our long layings. Again, because the bees are coming in the front and the way that the frames are oriented, they basically came in and they were hitting a frame right away. So I think that helped keep moisture in and cause some of our issues. So in this particular photo, this is kind of a picture of which hive I'm talking about. It's in the pink one. It looks like a pig. And the front of it just bowed out so much. And then you can see there's mildew here as well. At the peak of the bow, that's where our vent hole is. So that's where it's bowing out. It also sagged at the bottom as well. We were able to kind of fix it by putting a rod and drawing it in and kind of fixing it. And miraculously, later in the summer, some of these bows just went away. So that's not great, but I was glad that it kind of fixed itself. I don't know enough about woodworking to know why it fixed itself, but we're still working on it. And I think the design has changed since we got the plans. The other system that we're looking into, and the system that we get the most questions about, is the top bar hives. These are really popular as a more natural way to keep bees. So we knew that we had to include these. These hives are again a horizontal hive, and they have sloped sides. They are not standard frames. Instead, you put these bars in that have like a triangle, and the bees attach the comb to those triangles. And then they build it out in the shape that they like. And they do leave bee space on all the sides, but occasionally you have to unattach your frames. Sometimes they attach them to the side of the hive. The typical product that a top bar hive produces is cut comb. So in this picture down here, if you were doing cut comb, you would just cut sections out of it and put it in whatever packaging you had. And this is kind of the way that the frames sit inside of the hives. And here they are. For these, we got kits from Man Lake, and then we modified them because they didn't have lids that were going to survive a Nebraska winter. They were more open at the top. So this is the modification we came up with. And they seem to work well depending on how wide your wingspan is. They're kind of heavy and you have to pull it off straight. Again, there's no need to lift boxes to inspect these hives, and our beekeepers really like that about this hive and the long laying. It does take the bees longer to grow the hive since they have to build out all the comb and all the foundation. So we did notice that. However, what was really interesting is that these took off later in the summer, and we were getting just to the point where we had to figure out if we were going to harvest from these hives or leave every frame in there. And that's right when the fall hit. So we left it up to the beekeepers, and most of them decided to harvest maybe 2 or 3 to give them a little bit of space, but leave most of the stuff in there. Most of the wax and the brood and mostly the honey, so that they had something to feast on during the winter. Another problem that we had with these is if the bars weren't spaced correctly, we would get cross comb, and then even if they were spaced correctly, we were getting them. This was probably the worst case of this we had. There were, in this hive, she had fixed it a few times. You can see these rubber bands are fixes she had already done, and they kept wanting to build, instead of with these bars this way, they kept wanting to go this way. So we were able to go out there, and what we did is we cut the comb off and then reattached it the correct way with rubber bands, and then we checkerboarded it. So if we had really straight comb on, we put that on one side of the one we needed to fix, and then another straight one on the other side. And that seemed to really help them draw out correctly, and it kind of changed the structure that they were building, and it fixed this problem. So now she can lift up 1 at a time instead of having to worry about having to lift 3 or 4 and wrecking the comb. So the first year of our project was all about getting our hives kind of set up, making sure that the bees got all the frames drawn out. Everything that we gave them was brand new equipment, so they had to kind of build the comb in every single hive, and then get ready for winter. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. Some of the beekeepers were able to harvest small amounts of honey, but we really wanted to make sure we had strong, healthy hives going into winter. It was really interesting because the beekeepers were treating for mites all along when appropriate, but when UNL was finally able to go do visits this fall due to COVID, we just had extremely high mite loads, including some of the highest mite loads they had ever seen. And we definitely told them to treat. That's part of the project that we have, and kind of part of our details in our contracts. And they were doing that, but it was just seemed to be a really bad mite year. So we quickly made plans to carry out what UNL recommended to do going into winter. And then we also started to collect data and test how our collection methods worked for collecting weight. So we have brood minders on the control hives, and then we had a series of like weights and scales to take weights. So we're making some tweaks here and there to ensure that we're getting the accurate total amount per beekeeper that they're lifting per hive, and then also their thoughts throughout the season. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here and move over to my demo, but I did want to just talk about this picture real quick. These are the 4 apiaries that with the beekeepers, so you can kind of see things in action. We didn't tell them they had to paint their hives or not paint their hives. We gave them to them all painted with white. So some of them painted them, some of them didn't. And that's fine. So we have the 2 top bars right up the top here. So she has top bar hives, and then she had the Nuke hives. And then here are her control hives. This beekeeper had the long Langstroths, 2 of those, and then she had the top bars, and then again her control hives are here. And then this one had the keeping in shallows, and she was keeping in nuke boxes. And then this beekeeper had the long Langs and then the shallows. He's also has different hives that he does his own testing on as well. So his apiary is bright, colorful, and fun to visit because there's always some really interesting things going on. We're really hoping in year 2 we can have field days at everybody's apiary. We just have to kind of see how things go. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to move over here. Great. Okay. So just with the stuff that I have on hand, and then one trip to a beekeeper's house to get some frames, I was able to kind of replicate what the test hives look like. So that's what you guys are seeing here. This is the traditional setup. So again, 2 deeps. We have the traditional frames. These are deep frames, and they go into the hive like this. And then here is a honey super on top. This would be what the shallow system looks like. So you can see there's 2 boxes. They're about the same size as 1 deep. And then their frames are here. So you can kind of see they're like just about half as big. And then again, that when we were talking about that bee space, this is kind of what it looks like. It's that gap right there. So the bees are able to go around and any way they want around the frame. This is the Nuke system. So these are 5 across instead of 10. And again, these go in here like this. This one's 3, so you can just imagine how tall like 6, 7, 8 of these can get. I think these would be really good if you were going to like split later in the season or create more hives. I think they're really good for that. But our beekeepers do like them. And then here is kind of a representation of the long Langstroths we're using. And so again, like in both of these, the bees come in through the bottom, and this is how the frames are oriented. In our system, the frames are oriented like this. So the bees come in, and there's frames right when they come in with like this space here. So they come in like that. I think that's part of the problem, is that there's not a lot of ventilation since you're coming in and hitting a frame right away. So I'm thinking we might put some ventilation on the side. I need to talk to the beekeepers about that, and then of course consult with UNL, but I think that might help with some of the moisture issues that we're seeing within the hives. And again, we have, ours are set up so there's about 30 of these per hive, 30 frames. And you just kind of like pull them up and look at them and put them back in. This is what a top bar frame looks like. So the bees built this all themselves. This one is really straight on the bar, so you can kind of see that triangle, that's what they affix their comb to. And so this is a really good example. The bees use this one for their brood, that's why it's darker, and then they were starting to fill it with honey. This is kind of an example of how we found they really wanted to use it. So you can see it's curvy. It's not on there straight, and they were actually starting to build secondary comb within the grooves there. So that's, I think that's typical of the top bar system, but this is the kind of stuff that we were trying to correct with the checkerboarding that I talked about earlier. And then this is like what you would harvest for honey. So it's pretty clean, it's nice and white. You could cut it into sections and put it in your container. And this one's really straight. So it's a good example of that. And then just to show you this against a deep frame. So in our systems, they're about the same width, but you can kind of see where the gaps are. Okay, I'm like ready for Q&As. That didn't take nearly as long as I thought, but I was trying to slow down how fast I spoke.
No, that was great. Thank you, Kirsten. We have one question in the chat, and I've actually got a couple as a beekeeper myself. So we'll start with Cheryl's question. Do you happen to know what mite treatments were being used? Sorry, the chat just jumped for me. Prior to UNL checking the colonies this last winter.
Yeah, they were using the Apivar strips. Most of them were, and then we did have one who was doing the vaporization treatment. The guy who was using the vaporization said that he lost a hive in his long laying, and he assumes it's because the vapors weren't reaching all the way back, which happened to be where his brood nest was.
I might ask one of mine quick. Do you know, are all the hives in this project made from the same type of wood? Are they all pine, or was, yeah, do you know what they're made out of?
Yeah, so most of them are pine except for the long layings. We couldn't get pine boards that were so long, so I think those might be ash. It's a softer wood, which could be part of the problem.
And that was the one that bowed out, right?
Yeah.
Dale asks, does the art help the bees find the hives? Have you tested different color designs? Any worries about paint toxicity to the bees, treated wood, etc.? Dale's got a lot of questions, so we'll start there.
Okay, yeah, sure. The hive designs, there's a theory that helps the bees find their home again. Like they look at the hive and they memorize kind of shapes on it. So on ours, we try to use real simple like shapes and different patterns. That particular farm with the really colorful hives, he has a farm and they do a lot of like on-farm tourism. So they actually had families come out and paint the boxes. And so that's why they're so colorful. They had a whole bunch of people paint them for them as a kind of an agritourism thing. And then I don't think the toxicity of paint is really a worry. You want to protect the wood. You don't want to have bare wood out there. So we use latex outside paint, outdoor paint, and usually whatever's left over or around. But you want to protect them some way. I don't think you want to use treated wood though. Would not recommend.
How about using cotton batting to seal gaps in the hives? Has anyone thought about that?
We did not try that, but it sounds like, I mean, we're gonna have to try something this year. I personally use cotton batting as like a quilt top to help collect moisture in the winter, but I haven't used it within the hive. I feel like the bees might think it's trash and might pull it out for you.
can you stack nukes side by side and then use a standard box across the bottom or the middle across to, I mean, a combo hive kind of?
I think people have done it. I would worry that there would be fighting because by the time if they're side by side and then you put one box on top to like have them both maybe do some honey production, they're going to have different queen pheromones, and that may encourage some fighting, much like you would see when there's robbing or if you leave something open too long.
I think I've seen that model maybe where they use 2 nukes together with 1 deep or something just to fill up the nukes and then pull the nukes and add a queen to 1 and sell them or something like that, but maybe not in a standard production.
Yeah, if you have a queen per nuke, I don't think that that's a good method because they will fight when they meet. But if you have a queenless colony and you're trying to do that, that is a strategy. There's like a million ways to keep bees, and it's hard to like, as somebody's tried something at some point and got some result that might be different than somebody else who tried the same thing like 3 days later. So I mean, they're a wild animal and an insect still. When it comes down to it, they're going to do what they want to do.
Dale, you've got some more questions here, but I'm going to move to some other people's questions and we'll come back to yours, and maybe Kirsten can answer them in an email too if we need to. Carla asks about styrofoam hives or other materials aside from standard wood.
We did not include the styrofoam hives in this study. However, 2 of the beekeepers in the studies both have them, and they both really like I can't remember how they pronounce them, but they both really like them. And so I can see them moving to those styrofoam hives. I've seen them used, and they were somebody up northern Nebraska, which is quite, our climate's different from north to south, quite different, but they were trying to keep in styrofoam hives and they only had 1 deep. And I still think with those styrofoam hives, you need 2 deeps to survive a Nebraska winter.
I've seen some of the styrofoam hives used as swarm boxes, but not as often as standard hive boxes. But
they're super cool. They've got a lot of movable parts, and it looks like you can really like customize them to fit your goals. So I think they're neat. They're just not a part of this project.
Yeah. Cindy is curious about the long Langstroth hive. Do you see any evidence? I guess you're not through the first winter yet, right? She's asking. It seems like it might inhibit clusters in the winter as bees tend to move up for food stores. Any thoughts about movement in the winter?
I mean, that's what we're trying to figure out is, are they going to move horizontally with the hive, or are they going to try to move up and then have microclusters? So far we've lost 2. So we'll see when we get digging into it why we lost them and what we can maybe do to stop that from happening.
That seems like that might also be a problem for top bars in the side-to-side movement, but I don't know if I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, it's the number 1 argument I think that you see against horizontal hives is that bees like to move up. Are they going to move horizontally? So that's kind of what we're trying to get down to.
Becky asked if you had problems with frames in the top bar breaking off when examined, and did you lose any of those colonies?
We have not lost those colonies yet because of that problem. We have lost some top bars. Just I think this winter for us has been really odd. We've had really warm temperatures and then really cold, and so in all hives we're finding microclusters. That's why we have some control hives to kind of go with the research hives. We can see if this is happening across the board. But yeah, I mean, that was like part of the learning curve when the beekeepers they first got the top bars. They hadn't had experience with them, and so they were, inspecting them like they did their long langs, and they weren't, like ready for how you would inspect a top bar, I guess is what. And then so they've now gotten the education. They're getting better. They're not breaking the comb, but that first like couple of weeks, I mean, they were like calling me just really upset because they're like, I don't think I can do this. They keep breaking off. So it's just kind of like how you have to adjust how you check those hives.
Becky gave you a big thumbs up. there's a question about where to find information about styrofoam hives. We might have to look that up.
I would do your own Google search and kind of look at it, and then also if you know any beekeepers who are using them, definitely ask them what they think about it, their experience, and where they got them. I tend to. I don't like to ask Facebook groups because again, you're going to get 50 different answers from 60 different people. But if you have somebody you trust, or if you go to your associations and are able to network, they'll be able to connect you with somebody in your area who's using them if they are.
I think I saw that Man Lake maybe sold some styrofoam ones, but I'm not sure. You could at least look at them on their website. Not recommending that you buy them there, but or not, either way.
No, I mean that's like my favorite part of beekeeping is like, yeah, there's something different every single time you go out there, and a new problem, a new situation or whatever, and maybe there's a new hive to test out. But that's what keeps me interested and keeps me kind of going with beekeeping, is all the just the mental agility you have to be a beekeeper.
I'm curious about the migratory lids, which is something that I haven't really observed before. Can you explain a little bit more about those, or how those are supposed to work?
Yeah, let me use my setup over here to try to explain them. So, move this real quick. A migratory lid fits on the hive flat, and then it has it's a little bit longer than the actual box. It comes off a few inches, and it kind of just sits on flat. And it's so, if you are moving pallets of bees across the United States, you can stack the pallets on top of each other flat. So if that makes sense. So it comes out a little bit, it kind of just hugs the top. And it's flat.
So if you have 3 on one of those hives, I guess what's the purpose of having 3 across a long Langstroth hive versus having 1 long?
It's easier for some of our shorter people to take the top off where they need to. The hives, the lids and my dad built them, the lids for the top bars, you have to have a long wingspan, and you have to be able to lift it straight up and then off. And so it's great if you're taller than I am, or some of our other beekeepers. So that's why.
I guess I've seen some of those, or at least top bars that have hinges and like a rod that you'd stick in to keep the lid open. Were there thoughts about doing something like that for these?
We have that on 2 of the top bars, and then when actually the beekeeper went to grab those frames from the dead out she had, she opened it and it fell off. She was like, "This was really hard." I was like, I'm really sorry.
Gotcha.
So we'll have some fixing that we have to do. But a rod, we had a chain to keep it. Again, it's just like the Nebraska wind. If you're out checking and you have this happen, it can rip off any lid.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. You haven't talked much about honey production. The first year is always iffy, but how was the honey harvest for these beekeepers?
Yeah, it was minimal. And again, we weren't really looking at honey production year 1, and that's how we were kind of designing the project. We weren't focused on it. We told the beekeepers, if you have excess, here's the minimum we want you to have going into the winter. And so we kind of based that on how they correspond to deeps, your traditional deeps, and anything over they could harvest. I think we got harvest off the long langs with the middle system, and then we got some minimal harvest from the nukes and the shallows. But the long langs that he did harvest from, I think that they're close, they were weak when he last checked them. So I really, really wanted to focus on strong, healthy hives into winter, not honey production. And that's kind of how it's recommended you run your first year anyway, is get them to where they need to be to survive winter and then focus on honey.
Awesome. I'll go back to some of Dale's questions. Is there a place you know of to find plans for top bar hives, or kind of what you used in the study? And did you try any wiring of the foundation to the top bars. I guess there is no foundation in the top bar so far. I guess that's something you're aware of, anyone trying this wiring foundation to the top bar hive?
Yeah, I guess I personally haven't seen or heard about wires being utilized in top bars. And I mean, our frames are all drawn out now. That's kind of what we wanted to have them do. I think maybe he's talking about to make them stronger to use an extractor possibly. But I think that, I don't know, I think it seems to be people who like to have top bars they don't usually have extractors, and they're keeping bees for different reasons and different styles. So, and then there are lots of plans for top bars, I think, online. Like I said, the ones we're using come from a kit from Man Lake that we just modified the lid.
I also want to extend the option to anybody, if you want to unmute and just ask questions. Unless everyone really likes hearing my voice, feel free to talk on your own. So Dale asks, would migratory lids help with shallow boxes as well, to help control cold and moisture? Yeah, do bees seal the gaps?
I don't know if we would use migratory lids. I think, does he mean in between the shallows? You think? Yeah, I think the thing I might recommend is once you get to a certain point in the season to stop pulling those boxes apart, because bees build bridges between the two hives. So let them do that is, I think, what we're going to recommend, and stop breaking it apart and cleaning it off. So they seal the gaps themselves and how they want to seal it. Makes it difficult to check for mites to do your treatment. So your timing, I think, has to be pretty on point for when you would stop checking those and let them build that comb in between. One thing I will say with the shallows is that we had a beekeeper who used a deep in-frame feeder when they first got started, and she was able to do that because she took out the frames between the two boxes where it correspond, and that seemed to work really well. So she was, again, able to integrate stuff in her system into these systems.
Okay. Karen asks, would you consider trying a deep Layens hive in the future, being that they are quite different than the Langstroths?
Yeah, I mean, we've been getting questions about what other things we're going to trial, and the way this grant and this funding is set up, we're testing these these 4 for 3 years. So after that, maybe if there's more interest in different alternative hives that we haven't tried and no research going on in our area and that, then we would maybe think about expanding the study a little bit wider. But this one's kind of set in stone because of how we designed it when we were approaching funders, writing grants, basically.
Yeah, I'll note that I believe Dr. Leo will talk about Layens hives later this afternoon in the, I think, 2:45 slot. So make sure to catch him there if you're interested in that. Dale, when you ask about applications for future research, do you mean as a participant in the research, or? Yes. Do participants have to be in Nebraska? Maybe I'll ask it that way.
So again, because it was designed and we had to apply for a grant, and then it's all kind of set in stone. So participants had to be with not only in Nebraska, but in a certain radius of where I'm located, because I was going to be doing, and I will once we can, do inspections once a month. I was going to go visit, check it out, see what problems they were having, see if we need to get UNL out there, and to keep our costs down with mileage. And because when you're building a grant, you have to have all those costs up front. That's how it was designed. If we did a future study, I mean, we could expand it, or the Great Plains Master Beekeeping Program could expand it and create and have different states. So it's yes. In the future, if we do another project and we want to do a multi-state project, we would put out another call. The best way to kind of stay up to date with the Center for Rural Affairs and all of our projects is to check us out on Facebook or sign up for our newsletter. And our website is cfra.org.
I guess I'd be curious from the audience, those who are beekeepers currently. This project, I believe, is mostly based on weight and handling, right? For people in different hive types. Are there other factors that folks in the audience would want to see a project like this done on to kind of evaluate different hives on a basis of X, Y, Z? Just curious if anybody has thoughts on applications for future research in a different way.
Yeah, and if there's any, nonprofit organizations that want to talk about the Specialty Crop Block Grant process, I'm totally open to sharing our experience and how we designed it and how we wrote that grant.
Yeah, awesome.
If you are a farmer, which beekeepers are considered farmers by the USDA, you can apply for your own research projects through an organization called SARE, SARE, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And they have farmer rancher grants to do your own research. So you could design a project with hives that you wanted to test on your farm and share with your community.
I'll put a plug in there. I wrote a grant for SARE, actually one of those farmer rancher grants earlier at the end of last year for Joanna and I, who's on staff. We want to run a research project on those horizontal hives, the long Langstroths, but a little bit of a different setup. So I was hoping we would know whether we got that or not by the time of this conference, but we should find out sometime here in February. So if we get the money to run that experiment, then you'll see more from the Kansas Rural Center about those hives for sure. Cindy says she'd like to see more on the styrofoam boxes and different configurations there. So that could be the next round of lands and styrofoam and Wara hives, maybe. I don't know exactly.
The Loray hives?
Loray hives, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't include those because you can't pull the frames out to inspect them. So I think they're technically illegal.
Illegal? Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but that's what I've been told. But again, 50 people have 60 different opinions, so somebody could say it's illegal. But yeah, we didn't. If you can't pull it up to inspect it, we weren't interested in trying it out.
I did at one time own a Warray hive and tried to use it, and the bees died almost immediately. And that's probably 90% on me, but I did not have a lot of luck with that style. And for, I guess, anyone in the audience who's not familiar with them, I would probably characterize them as a Langstroth vertical format, but with top bars, like you would use in a horizontal top bar hive. So it was interesting. It was beautiful looking hive, but it didn't work for me, at least. So. James wants to know about the ability to move colonies, moving them away from chemical spray. James, are you asking about the ability, ease of moving an entire hive, say of these nuke hives and long Langstroths, versus kind of a standard style? Yes, he says yes.
Yeah, I guess I don't recommend moving if you're worried about it. I definitely feel like I've had some drift issues here, and I know UNL has dealt with them. I would recommend, really getting to know the farmers around where your hives are, communicating with them, becoming friends. You can register for Drift Watch, but in our situation, mine are right against a conventional corn soybean field. And that farmer will tell me when he's spraying and what he's spraying. And depending on that, I'll just cover them with like wet sheets for the day. And that'll keep them a little bit cooler, and helps the wetness kind of helps filter out some of the spray. I don't like personally moving hives. I mean, you have to do it either at night or early in the morning. Again, you're lifting a lot of weight, even with any of these systems. If you have the nukes, they could topple over. But yeah, we haven't had any farmers have to move them. But you saw the pictures. A lot of them are in windbreaks. So,
do we know, is there I don't know, kind of a standard? I think from gardens or in different states, there's maybe 50-foot offset from, say if someone's growing a garden and they have a field next to them, and there's encouragement for the farmer to make sure there's at least that much distance. Are there guidelines for how far away the spraying should happen from a hive? If you can work with the farmer near you about that?
I mean, I think it's on the beekeeper to have good site selection. I think for organics it's 30 to 50 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're next to a conventional field, what you can do. And I think you have putting in some plants to help offset that, or to create kind of like, we talked about the rain shadow area, but like if you have tall trees and the wind comes up, there's going to be like a dead space where the wind doesn't hit. So creating that. But yeah, site selection is, it's key. I've totally lost bees because I thought it was a great site, and then throughout the summer it's just too shady, too wet, whatever, and had to move them out. And yeah, moving bees when they're in a hive that's a dangerous proposition, I think. At least for me, it means if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong.
Yeah. I did drop the link for Drift Watch here in the chat. You can, if you're not familiar with that, you can register an account there, and then there's kind of a map, sort of like Google Maps, that you can drop pins on where your bees are, and supposedly people can around you can or should check that to see what kind of hazards there are for spraying around them in their agricultural fields.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the rules are, but I've been heard like if it's a co-op spraying, they have to check.
Okay. Drift Watch is made by Field Watch, I believe. So it's Field Watch is the parent company of the Drift Watch site. I guess there's actually a bee check. If you go to that website, Drift Watch, there's a different one. It's called Bee Check, which I guess is actually the bee version you'd want to register on, and I'll get that link there. Lisa asks, what are some good considerations for site selection?
You want to have good airflow. I would say you want maximum sun, and you want it as early as possible. That's how the bees kind of know to get out and do their job, is when the sun hits and warms up the hive. For all of mine, and again, because I'm in Nebraska, I like to have a north windbreak. So mine are usually against buildings on the north side, so they're facing south. That's what I like in a selection. Nothing too shady. You don't really want it too wet, but you do want a water source if you can find it and have it. There's some recommendations. Again, anybody should join. Kansas is part of this, the Great Plains Master Beekeeping, and that's gpmb.unl.edu. It's free to join, and they have a ton of resources. They're actually getting ready to have a virtual Bee Fun Day, February 13th. I will, gpmb.unl.edu.
Working on it.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, free to sign up, and then you can it's kind of like Master Gardener or Master Naturalist, and you can move up different levels. So you can start out as journeyman, then move up to master or apprentice or whatnot. So there's it sounds like it's a lot of fun. The Center for Rural Affairs partnered with the Kansas Beekeeping Association and UNL and other beekeeping organizations to create this program.
I don't. I kind of am afraid to say things in case I'm wrong in front of Becky, the master here, but but in terms of site selection, I think some of the mistakes I've made. I think morning sun is particularly important. It's good to have as much sun as possible, but there have been a couple times where I sited a hive in a place that was shady for the morning, but got sun for the rest of the day. Kind of based on the trees and everything. And those hives really suffered and didn't grow and eventually died out and stuff. And it seems like, getting them warmed up. If the sun is not doing that for them, kind of on their front porch on the landing there, they'll warm their own bodies up to get going. But that seems, I think that morning sun is pretty important. And so I've definitely tried to, at least in Kansas, to give them, that shelter on the north facing south. So they're on the south side of a north shelter belt or a building or something like that. But also kind of, I don't know, sometimes angling a little bit east so it catches that morning sun is helpful. other mistakes I've made in terms of the slope of the land. Sometimes the hive, especially on a stand or something, will sink a little bit, and then you get water in the landing that flows back. So kind of watching out for some of those things. Really professional people, I think, sometimes will put down gravel or some kind of really sturdy surface that's not going to sink. But it's always good to, and if your hive's directly on the ground, which isn't great either, it's probably less likely than if you have legs that are lower surface area that might sink, I guess. So
Yeah, my dad builds my hive stands for me, and throughout the season, I'll have a level in I have a tote that I use for beekeeping, especially when I go
mhm.
on site, and I'll just check the level, and if we need to pop it up and put wood under it, we will. And those are in my sites that are in other people's yards or their fields or whatever, so it's not like I can throw down like a whole bunch of gravel and
Right.
carpet. So we're kind of like leveling as we go. We want to keep it level, but
Mhm.
that morning sun is key, and like I said, it just like warms them up and tells them to start to get going, like get on out there. As a new beekeeper, my first few years, I walked by my hives when I walk my dogs, and I was like, God, they're just all hanging out on the porch every afternoon, like they're not doing anything. So I've like been tempted to build like shade cloths so they get some shade, so they're not too hot, and maybe they do more, but as they get more experience, I'm like, I'll just let you guys do you and appreciate that you can have time to like have some lemonade on the porch or whatever. But yeah, if we recommend in our Explore Beekeeping class, when you're looking for a site, to observe it the whole year, because you don't want to put it where it's going to be drifty. You want to make sure they're getting adequate like airflow, and you want that sun is so key. So if you're thinking about keeping bees, just start paying attention to that area now so you can see how it behaves throughout the year. You would hate to like find out that there's a natural spring or a river that goes through there like in the month of June, which could totally happen here, and I'm assuming can happen there too.
Lisa said a citing mistake she made was, I think, moving the hive in the afternoon and not morning or evening. And putting it down. Lisa, you can unmute. I'm gonna butcher this. I'm sorry. But yeah.
I'm
Placing
sorry. Oh,
Go ahead.
pardon
Go
me.
ahead.
I'm sorry about that. No, the very first time I ever moved a hive to a new site, it was like late morning. And so I oriented it to where the sun was.
Mm.
And then the next time I went out was super early in the morning, and I realized that I hadn't oriented it how I wish I had, which would have been as the sun was coming up, right? And so I guess my point, Kirsten made it earlier, and that is do a site survey often throughout the year and kind of think about what you're doing, I guess, and plan it a little more. But that's part of experience, I guess.
Yeah, and then the nice thing is in the winter, you have those time to make those adjustments, hopefully before the snow falls. So if you don't like where things are, it's easy to kind of orient and move and change things when they're all like clustered up and staying cozy inside. It's in the summer where it's really hot and they're all out and like the sun comes up early and whatever other issues you have, or maybe you're in a dearth and they're mad. Like it's those times that you don't want to be messing with them and moving them around.
Mhm.
But yeah, site selection is key.
Go for it.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's so important to know where they're gonna go and what they have for available for them. Just like your own house, they built my basement too low. It does flood in my basement. There's a river every spring. Don't have that happen with your hives.
Excellent. Cindy notes she had a site right next to trees on the west, and the bees did extremely well, but so did the ticks. So another consideration of considering not just for the bees and what's going to work for them, but also, kind of what works for you as a beekeeper. Being covered in ticks every time you check the hives does not sound pleasant, Cindy. So.
Oh gosh, no. Nope. I didn't know how many skunks were on our farm until we started keeping bees, and now I'm well aware that we have skunks on our farm. And I used to sleep in the summer, like they're not too far from the house. I would sleep with the windows open in the summer, and you could smell every time they came, like through everywhere. So, yeah, you don't know what's there until you put them there, I guess, too.
Do we have any other questions? I think for a lot of the more basic beekeeping questions, you are welcome to attend Becky and Steve's presentation this afternoon about the basics of beekeeping, and it will be phenomenal. So really excited to have them here, and they are great leaders and champions, pollinators here in Kansas. So yeah. Lucinda notes, for ticks, keep sulfur in an old sock and bang it on your ankles before going to check the hives. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I noticed some of the photos that a few of the hives had quite a bit of growth kind of coming up around them. Did you set specifications for your beekeepers in this experiment about kind of keeping things maintained, or a certain area around the hives at all?
Yeah, the really weedy picture I think you're talking about, she's getting ready to like totally modify it because she said that it was hard to check, and it just got out of control. And she had pollinator seeds and whatnot in there. And if you guys have ever planted pollinator mix, you know, like it's like really weedy until like year like 2 and 3. So she's modifying that. We did not put requirements on sites like that. That's why we were leaning on having more experienced beekeepers to kind of be able to identify and keep it. And you'll kind of notice everybody else's yards are pretty tidy. So some people keep their hives way up in the air, some keep them like way down low. That's just a beekeeping preference. And again, we wanted to kind of test it for practicality of beekeeping. So I don't mind having those variances.
Mm-hmm. Well, excellent. Take one last call for some questions here. Otherwise, we can end a little bit early and give folks more of a break before the noon keynote.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be more to come. I hope that you guys could pop up here if we have field days and come visit our apiaries. You know, everybody's welcome too. And we'll probably have another webinar end of the year, and we'll keep publishing and kind of posting about this study. So make sure you check out the Center for World Affairs. We're also on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. I think we tweet even. There's so many things.
Yeah, and I think we will definitely work to share out those resources through our KRC channels as well. So yeah, just really want to thank you, Kirsten, for your time with us today and the great demonstration and all the good information. So yeah.
Thanks for having me. If anybody has any questions that pop up, or if you're, you know, like me and thinking about this when you're trying to sleep, feel free to email me and connect. Other than that, yeah, I'm excited for the rest of the programming. So I'll see you guys in maybe the chats or something too.